My name's Madeleine Skillen. I'm the marketing manager at Procore Technologies, and today I'm joined by Prakash Sengani, CEO and co-founder of Navitech. His current role focuses on the implementation, management and development of digital strategies. And so he's the perfect person to be with us today to discuss how technology is going to play a vital role in the future of Middle Eastern construction. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Surviving the Dubai heat. It's a tough one this summer. But
Yep.
I know that obviously you're very well au fait with the Middle Eastern construction, the landscape and kind of the inner workings of it. But today we're really focusing in on new technologies. And I'd love to pick your brain to begin with, just in a really broad sense about digital mindset and the importance of adopting a digital mindset in the adoption of new technologies. So could you just give me a little bit of information about, in your opinion, the role of new technologies in the future of Middle Eastern construction?
Yeah, great question. I think digital mindset inherently is about being agile, adaptable, and that's important, right? About for the future and not knowing what's coming. I think the pace of change that we're seeing at the moment, we've seen that with the things like ChatGPT and generative AI at the moment, where the rate of change is just so immense. And so adopting this digital mindset, I think inherently helps you to develop a adaptable mindset, a agile mindset, and that's important for the future of the Middle East and how we're going to be working going forward. And in terms of being able to implement, adopt, and be open to some of these technologies that are coming down the track, and as I mentioned, some of which we don't even know about. So I think that's really, really important.
I think pushing that envelope of innovation is kind of what these new technologies are unlocking for us, and in the context of our region as well, it's going to be absolutely crucial to our attainment of kind of like the 2030 vision or the 24C master plan and really beyond that as well.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the nature of the way that the region's governed as well is always looking at the future. It's not there's not very many things that are short term. It's always looking at the long term. You look at the Dubai 10X, and you look at some of these 2030, 2045 visions that are across the region. They're always looking at what's coming down the track rather than what's right in front of us now.
Although we're innately looking ahead within this region, do you think that doesn't come without its challenges, though, in terms of kind of, it's easier said than done, right? And we find that a lot, but the actual kind of inner workings day to day of adopting new technologies, what do you think the real challenge and the resistance is to that?
Absolutely. So yeah, the challenges come from not knowing what's coming. You've obviously got existing processes, systems, mindsets that have been developed over years and through good reason, right? Through experience, through knowledge, and sometimes you end up becoming wedded to these things and blinded, or you get this inertia and resistance to wanting to change. And I think those challenges, I wouldn't say that they're exacerbated in this region, but they certainly are deep seated. And so you've got things like the cultural traditions here, and some of the kind of trading traditions that date back to when Dubai, if you look at Dubai, for example, was a fishing village, and those kind of business practices that have been built up over time. So obviously changing the mindsets and changing those practices is gonna take a lot of effort to do. Then some of the other is I feel is the lack of awareness, and particularly the lack of awareness of how some of these digital tools can benefit and be impactful to what we're doing. So there's an educational piece. I think that often when we talk about digital transformation, or you talk about the adoption of digital tools, is overlooked. It's almost like the people coming up with these tools think they see how this can be a huge impact. They see the benefits of this, but forget that other people might not see it the same way, and so you forget that the education element. Then we've got the regulatory kind of environments, which have been again set up over time and built upon from like best practices and built upon things that are been traditional, and so breaking those down or adapting those for the new digital world, I think is another area and another challenge that we constantly face.
Yeah, I think a lot of this though comes down to change management, and I think that's a top-down approach. The change management is really effective. Change management is when there's an openness, and it goes back to what you were saying about kind of some of the confusion. You need to dispel this myth that, you know, these new technologies are going to take it over kind of the human benefit, because that's what people are scared about, losing their jobs. Completely valid fear to have, but at the same time, if we see these as tools and not necessarily the thing that is like going to replace, that's ultimately going to make people feel a lot more at ease with their implementation. And also that's going to help them realize that they're a part of the kind of the success story. You know, they need to be an active participant in it. So
yeah, exactly. And it goes back to the thing that you started with about mindset, right? It's about ensuring that people are adaptable, people are open to new ideas and willing to accept some of the things that are coming down the track. And I think that some of these fears, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that there isn't going to be some job losses with technology coming in every kind of revolution that's happened in history. There's obviously been some attrition, but what tends to happen, or what's proven to be happen, is that the complexion of the roles change, right? So people have to adapt and
roles
change.
evolve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing you mentioned is seeing these technologies as tools, not as replacements to what you do.
Yeah.
Right. So they are there to augment what we do, help us do things more efficiently, be more productive, do things differently, right? And I think it's just about being open to them.
And also impact people in a really positive way in terms of, you know, people are finally going to be able to go home, maybe potentially on time. We all know that construction isn't really an 8-hour working day, but this should help to provide them with perhaps more balance. And that's something that I think has become even more of a priority since kind of the pandemic, and people start assessing, you know, that work-life split.
Yep. The kind of flip side to that, if you take some of the pandemic kind of trends, is like with more virtual meetings, right, with your Zoom and your Teams. In some cases, it's gone the opposite way, where some people are ending up working even more than they used to, rather than trying to find this balance. And I think it's probably good here to talk about the kind of these tools could be used in both in good and bad, or could impact us in both in good and bad ways. I went to watch Oppenheimer the other day, and that's a perfect example of how something that profoundly moved science forward as a tool. It could have been
No
used
spoilers.
just as a deterrent, right? Look,
Yeah.
as in the story is well known, so I don't know how much I can spoil it. But the point being is that as a tool, the nuclear deterrent could be just that. It's just the fact that you've got it and never have to use it is enough. But obviously, it could also be used to threaten, to coerce, and all those things. I know it's a bit extreme, but coming back to some of the technologies that we're seeing now, you look at generative AI and some of the robotics and automation that's happening. You could potentially see it as, okay, I can use this and wipe out my entire workforce, or you can perceive it as, I can augment my existing team to achieve more or achieve different things, to change the complexion of, or to change my business model. And so I think it's about perspective.
There's no replacing as well, like the practical years of experience that people that have been in the trade for a long time have. I really think the sweet spot, and we see it with like the kind of the younger, more digitally native generation, that, you know, they come in with a level of openness that maybe older generations don't have, but at the same time you can't replace kind of the amount of knowledge that they bring as well. Trying to partner the two, it's like a marriage, right? But trying to partner the two, that's really where you see the most successful implementations.
Yep. And this is something that I've always been a massive advocate of when I've been adopting and implementing digital solutions, is not ignoring the wealth of experience that already exists within organizations, and making sure that you're bringing them along on the journey with you, because they've got lots to teach, right? So obviously I was a young graduate and worked through the system, and I had this I don't know how to describe it. I had this itch to, or this kind of desire to push things and perhaps push them quicker than they needed to go forward, and that sometimes meant
the impatience of
exactly
youth.
impatience. I was looking for the word, and that impatience sometimes led me to dismiss the kind of experience that already existed, rather than listen to it, learn from it, and actually help make my implementation better. And I think that through maturity, I learned, and luckily I learned very, very quickly. And that helped with the implementation of a lot of the digital solutions that I successfully managed to deploy.
Well, we've spoken a lot in a broad sense about new technologies, but I'd really like to start delving a little bit deeper into specifically. So let's start with BIM. I think there's often a common misconception that, and rather ironically, people think about it quite one-dimensionally, that it's a live 3D model. But maybe you could give us a little bit more clarity on, for you, what is BIM truly offering? What is BIM?
BIM is a way of working. It's a philosophy, and BIM's all about data. At its core, it's all about data. It's about managing, structuring.
There's the confusion, though. You know, that's
and a lot of people have that. Right? So it's not. And this the reason I said this is because when I'm talking about BIM to clients or presenting, or in the past where I've been presenting, this is the perception lots of clients have, that BIM's a 3D model. It's actually not. And you could work in a BIM environment with 2D information, and we do, right? The outputs of the 3-dimensional models that we create through the BIM process are actually 2D drawings, and they're not going to disappear anytime soon. So for me, and I think just looking at it holistically, it's all about data. It's about managing that data, structuring that data, storing it, giving access to the data to the right people at the right time, and then how you progress or transfer that data through the different project life cycles or through the different stakeholders within a project. And fundamentally, that's what BIM's all about. And when you look at it through that lens, there's been some great deployments of it. You look at Expo here. So I think that really moved the needle in maturing the entire kind of supply chains, capabilities, knowledge, and ability to deploy BIM. It created a bunch of kind of documentation and standards, which have now been adapted and are used across the region. So I'm seeing a lot of what happened on the Expo being utilized in some of the projects in KSA, for example. So that's one kind of huge project or a driver for change that I've seen for good. Then you've seen things like the BIM mandate from Dubai Municipality. I'm being a bit Dubai centric, but I think Dubai's really been leading the charge on BIM. And again, that mindset change, which was forced through mandates, through almost a regulatory push, that has helped to mature organizations massively, and you're seeing the benefits of this now, right? So when I first came to the region 10 years ago, I remember having to do presentations to convince people of the benefits of BIM. Now we're doing presentations about what more can BIM do. It's not even a question that we're going to be using BIM.
Do you think that maybe 15 years ago then, when kind of BIM started to be part of the conversation, do you think that maybe it was a little bit too forward thinking for where we were? With that comment in mind, where...
Yeah, I think so. But I think this is the kind of the natural process of change and understanding and maturity. Look, BIM came into an industry that was massively reluctant to change, massively underfunded in terms of R&D and digitization, right? There's all these reports that have been quoted by management consultants, which I don't necessarily agree with, or I think that they're probably a bit outdated. But when BIM came in 15 years ago, it met an industry that was this resistant to change. That's changed as well. The industry itself has changed. The demographics have changed. As young people enter the workforce, you mentioned digitally native people. Those digitally native natives are now becoming leaders within the industry, right? You take my role as an example. What I'm doing now, or the roles that I did in the last 5 years, didn't exist when I was in university. I graduated as a civil engineer, and my career path at the time was going to be a site engineer, a resident engineer, or a section engineer. You know, there was this career path that involved very traditional roles within an engineering discipline, and some of these sort of digital delivery and BIM managers and all of that, they simply didn't exist then. So so the industries evolved as well.
So the industry's evolved as kind of like the digital natives have obviously kind of climbed through the ranks from a generational point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that makes complete sense. I think in terms of new technologies and in terms of BIM, I think, you know, often it's seen, like we talked about earlier on, we talked about it being a tool, it's not the solution, right? So trying to get these people on board to utilize and use it as a lever will really help to revolutionize the construction industry. And like you said, there's been some great success stories in this region, and Expo, you know, really pushed that forwards. Beyond BIM though, there's lots of other new technologies as well. So robotics then, I'm keen to, because robotics can be a little bit of a controversial topic, as we know, you know, within the media, but also like within the industry. It does, acceptance of it, I think, varies from one region to the next. But what role do you think robotics plays then in the future of Middle Eastern construction? Because we've started to see them used more and more now.
Yeah. And so if we kind of break down the different types of robotics that we're seeing, right? So you see things like 3D printing, which is essentially concrete being deposited by a robot.
Yeah.
You see robots laying bricks and blocks and things like that, and some of them even doing plaster. And then you see robots doing things like progress monitoring, taking pictures, automating, right? Just driving around, laser scanning or taking photographs. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in the industry as we start having the issues with attracting labor. So the industry as a whole, and usually we have a little bit of a lag in terms of some of these trends from what's happening in other parts of the world, like Europe and the US. So if you look there as an indicator of what might happen here, they've got a massive struggle with labor.
Skilled labor,
exactly right. Actually, there's a war for talent across the board, but particularly in some of the skilled labor. And so there we're seeing the adoption of bricklaying robots as an example, as a solution to a problem that's already there, right? It's not being perceived as something that's going to take over jobs. It's being seen as something to fill the jobs that they just simply can't get. And I think we've been lucky that we've got access to a labor pool from the kind of subcontinent, and some of that's got its own controversies, as you all know. So it's again looking at it from a different perspective, looking at it slightly differently.
And health and safety, I mean, you
Absolutely,
kind of just touched on it, but health and safety, it's massive. We can put robots where we wouldn't feel comfortable putting humans, you know, and as projects become more complex, obviously the level of danger tends to increase as well as a result of that. And I think health and safety is really at the moment at the forefront of people's minds. And like we said, especially in this region. Exactly.
And the biggest one is the heat, right? So putting people to work in and the heat extremes are going to only increase. We were just talking before this about some of the places we went on holiday and the extreme heats that people have encountered this year. And I think that has got a big impact. We can put robots to work in these environments and some of the harsh
extreme environments
that we have in this region. So I think robotics is a really interesting one. There is a balance, but you see other industries have over time wholeheartedly adopted this, right? So you look at the manufacturing industry, the aviation industry, the automotive industry is probably a great example of automation and robotics. And you're also seeing retail. So you go into some of these distribution centers from Amazon or Noon or some of these e-commerce sites, and they're roboticizing their
stock checks.
Exactly, right. So all of this, the kind of bringing the goods to people who pick them and pack them, all of that automation is happening. So if it's happening in these other industries, I don't see why we can't have a conversation about how we can utilize some of this technology for good within the construction industry.
You mentioned a little bit about 3D printing. And within this region, again, a little bit like robotics, we're starting to see it more and more. There was a greenhouse built out in Sharjah, which, you know, was a big success. We're now looking at building the 3D mosque. But I mean, How are you seeing that really change and streamline processes, but also from a sustainability point of view as well? I think people are asking questions.
Yeah, I'm a massive advocate of 3D printing. I've been banging on about 3D printing probably for the last 7 years. In my previous roles, I was really trying to push it to mainly try and get an understanding of how it's going to impact the way that we work and the way that we build. And I'm absolutely convinced that it's going to have an impact. It's going to be part of the mix. It's not going to replace the way that we build whole scale. And no technology ever will replace existing things, but it's going to be part of the mix. There's some exciting things happening here in the UAE. There's so many examples of 3D printed structures. You can go and visit 3D printed structures in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. If you went to Yas Acres, they've got 3D printed guardhouses. They've got a 2-story 3D printed building that the Dubai municipality did here in Dubai.
Even out in the kingdom as well.
Exactly. There's so much happening there now. So I've been involved with some of these giga projects, helping them to devise their 3D printing strategy. And they are investing quite heavily actually in understanding this impact, but also in adapting the regulatory environment to allow 3D printing to go forward. I think we're at a stage with 3D printing where the technology is proven. So it's no longer about doing proofs of concepts. It's now looking at proofs of value and then looking at how we adapt. We talked about some of the challenges. The regulatory challenge about 3D printing is one of the barriers at the moment, is working out how we can approve these under the current kind of permitting regimes, how we can approve them for human inhabitants, because it's a completely different way of putting a structure together.
Yeah, of course.
But I think in the very, very short to medium term, we're going to see more and more of this, and it's going to start impacting the way that we build, but not only that, but also the way that we design.
Yeah.
So 3D printing allows us to think more freely in the way that we design things, because design at the moment is kind of constrained by our building model methods, right? You design something that can be practically built. There's things that you can design that can only be 3D printed. You wouldn't have ever been able to design them or build them with any other technologies.
These technologies that we've just spoken about, it's incredibly exciting, as we look towards the future. And like you said, and we touched upon it earlier on, we love looking towards the future in this region. But what do you think companies should be mindful of when you look at implementing some of those which we've discussed today?
So definitely look at your workforce and whether they're ready for the implementation of these technologies. It's the worst thing, you investing in the latest and greatest software or the latest and greatest piece of hardware if your people are not going to use it. It's pointless, right? And so whenever you're looking at these things, and it's the kind of, I know it's a little bit cliche, it's the 80-20 rule, right? It's 80% about the people, 20% about the technology.
Absolutely.
If you had the mindset within your organization, we've talked about mindset quite a lot today, but if you've got this mindset within your organization to embrace change, to take on change, even if the technology is not the latest or greatest, you're going to see huge benefits from that. And then the converse, if you've got the latest and greatest technology, but your people just simply don't use it, it's gonna be a failure. So I think that's one thing that everybody should be mindful of.
An investment in tech shouldn't be at the cost of your investment in your people.
Exactly. It's about hearts and minds.
I was speaking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about kind of what other people should be mindful of, because I asked this question around a little bit, and one person said, when you're looking to implement new technology, people need to think about where it can be put into a pre-existing process to better it. Not that it's going to kind of strip back everything and start from scratch, which I think a lot of companies actually do take on that latter approach. It's like, we've got this new biggest, brightest, shiniest toy. How are we going to revolutionize? And sometimes it's not about revolutionizing, it's about just evolving what you already have. And I think that also, when you evolve it and people are still part of the process, that dispels some of the fear that they have as well, because you're slotting it into place, and that is then a tool.
And if I think back at the most successful implementations of technology that I've done, where we've been the most successful is, in the first instance, we kind of replicate existing processes in a digital manner, right? So it might be an analog paper-based process, for example, and we've turned that into a digital process using a tablet or an iPad or something like that. Then once you've done that, that's when you then start changing the process to drive efficiencies. I think for me, that has been the recipe to success in transforming digitally. And by doing that, by going on this journey, you're taking people on the journey with you, right? Rather than saying, right, here's the end goal, you've got to implement it now. You've got to utilize it as it is at the end. By taking people on the journey, explaining to them what the benefits are, some of the reasons why you're doing it, and then gaining feedback, adapting and changing along the way, I think is really, really important.
Before we end, I always like to ask our guests this question, which is essentially, what advice would you give to somebody that's looking to enter the world of construction, and more specifically, maybe in reference to some of the technologies that we've spoken about today?
Yeah, so I'm going to be boring and say the same thing I always say, and it's be curious. I think that's the biggest thing that I've found personally that's really advanced my career and helped kind of push the boundaries, is just constantly be curious. And I think that kind of feeds into a few other traits as well, right? About being some of the ones that we spoke about early on, about being adaptable and being agile and all of those things. But I think at its core, it's all about being curious. And that kind of also means that you're constantly learning, you're asking questions, you kind of end up being a little bit humble there, where you don't know it all. There's always something else to learn. There's always something you don't know. There's always other people that you can ask to help you and to inform you. So yeah, just simply be curious.
Yeah, I like that. I think curiosity is the crux of a lot of the other kind of attributes and traits that we've discussed today.
Absolutely.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot today. Prakash, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.
It's the perfect segue into our next episode, which will be looking at success stories from the site. My name is Madeline Skillen, and until next time, I'll be seeing you.